My name is Rachel Porter. I never imagined I'd be the kind of person who tells a story like this, but here I am. Just a few months ago, I had a husband I loved, a daughter I adored, and a house that felt like home. Thomas passed away on a Wednesday. It was a soft spring morning, the kind where the air still carries the chill of winter. He had been feeling off but said it was nothing. I was folding laundry when the call came from the hospital. They said they were sorry, like that meant anything. He was gone before I got there. The funeral was a blur. I remember rain. I remember holding Emily's hand while she held in tears she didn't understand. People said the usual things, the kind they say when they don't know what to say. Then they left. And it was just us. 3 days later, I pulled into the driveway with Emily beside me, still wearing her black dress. The porch light was on. His gloves were still on the railing. For a moment, I thought maybe life hadn't noticed he was gone. But when I tried the key in the front door, it didn't work. I tried again. Still nothing. I stepped back and saw the curtains had been changed. Emily looked up at me, confused. She asked if something was wrong. I wanted to lie. I wanted to protect her for just one more moment, but I couldn't. When I saw Linda through the window, sipping tea in our living room like it was hers, I felt something shift inside me. The grief was still there, sharp and heavy, but something colder started rising behind it. I didn't know how I was going to fight back, but I knew one thing for sure: I had to. The rain hadn't stopped since morning. It wasn't a storm, just a steady, cold drizzle that soaked through everything and made the world feel heavier. I remember watching the windshield wipers move back and forth like they were trying to sweep away more than just water. Emily sat quietly in the back seat, still wearing her funeral dress, hugging her knees. Her eyes were glassy. She hadn't said much since we left the cemetery, and honestly, I didn't have words to give her anyway. When I turned into our driveway, everything looked the same at first. The porch light was still on. The recycling bin sat right where Thomas used to forget to bring it in. His gloves were still hanging on the rail, damp from the rain. But something about the silence felt wrong. I parked and told Emily we'd get inside and make hot chocolate. It was the only plan I had. We ran through the rain, and I fumbled with the key, my fingers stiff and cold. I pushed the key into the lock like I'd done 100 times, but it didn't turn. I tried again, jiggling it a little. Still nothing. My stomach dropped. I forced a smile and told Emily the lock must be jammed, but I knew better. That wasn't how a jammed lock felt. It felt like the door had decided I didn't belong there anymore. Emily asked if something was wrong. I told her I wasn't sure yet, but when I stepped back to check the front window, everything inside looked off. The curtains weren't mine. Instead of the soft white ones I'd hemmed by hand last spring, there were thick floral drapes with tassels, the kind you see in old hotels. And behind them, I could make out boxes stacked against the wall where our couch should have been. I pressed my face closer to the glass. My heart sank. Sitting in Thomas's old reading chair was Linda, my mother-in-law, calm, composed, sipping tea. Her legs were crossed like she'd been there for hours. Across from her, fluffing throw pillows on the love seat, was Becky, her daughter. Both of them still dressed in black from the funeral. Emily followed my gaze and whispered that the curtains weren't ours. That was the moment something broke in me. I started banging on the door. First with my hand, then with my fist. I rang the bell over and over. Eventually the door creaked open just a few inches. The chain was still on. Linda stood in the gap with a blank face. She looked at me like I was someone she didn't recognize. She said she assumed I'd be staying at a hotel. I asked her what she meant. I told her Emily was freezing and we needed to get inside. She just looked at Emily and said that wasn't possible. She said the house belonged to Thomas. That now that he was gone, it was theirs again. She told me, flat as if reading off a grocery list, that I wasn't part of the Porter family anymore. I told her my name was on the deed. She didn't flinch. She just said I could call the police if I wanted to. Then she shut the door. I stood there in the rain, hand still on the knob, heart pounding. Emily leaned into me, confused and scared. I didn't know what to do. I didn't even know how to breathe. We got back in the car. Rain beat on the roof like it wanted to come in and cry with us. Emily buried her face in her hands and sobbed. She asked me why Grandma was doing this, why she wouldn't let us in, why Dad's pictures were still in there, and we weren't. I held her close and said the only thing I knew how to say. I told her we were going to get our home back. Everything that was ours. Everything her dad left behind. I had no idea how I was going to do it. but I meant every word. Mrs. Jenkins didn't ask many questions. She just opened her door, saw our faces, and brought us inside. Emily was wrapped in one of her crocheted blankets within minutes, sitting on the couch with a mug of warm milk while I tried not to fall apart in her guest room. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the wall for a long time. My hair was still damp, my hands still cold, but I couldn't feel much of anything. There was too much noise in my head, too much weight in my chest. When Emily finally drifted off, I stepped into the hallway and called Dana. She and I had been roommates in college, and though we hadn't talked in a while, she was the only lawyer I trusted. She answered right away, like she had been waiting. I told her everything. The locks, the curtains, the way Linda shut the door in my face. Dana was calm, but I could tell she was angry for me. She said if I'd been living in that house and contributing, I had rights even if the mortgage had only been in Thomas's name. I told her I wasn't sure what was in his name anymore. We'd refinanced the house 2 years ago, when Thomas's carpentry business hit a rough patch. I'd pulled from my freelance savings to help cover the payments. I handled the paperwork back then. I hoped my name had ended up on something. Dana asked if I had copies. I told her everything was still in the house. In the office drawer Thomas never organized. She told me not to go back in, that we'd fight this legally. But I couldn't wait. I needed to know. The idea came quietly. Not desperate, not reckless, just clear. The back door. The one Thomas always said he'd fix. He never did. The latch always caught just a little off, and sometimes, if you pulled just right, it would open without a key. I thanked Dana, and promised not to do anything risky. Then I hung up, turned off the light, and stared at the ceiling. I didn't sleep. Not really. My thoughts kept looping. His voice. His chair. That look on Linda's face when she said the house wasn't mine. Around 5 in the morning, I got dressed. Jeans, hoodie, sneakers, nothing flashy. I packed a small folder just in case I found anything. Emily was still asleep, curled up around a stuffed animal Mrs. Jenkins had given her. I stood there for a moment and watched her breathe. Then I walked out the door, down the block, and around the back of our neighborhood. The streets were quiet, the air heavy with dew. I took the long way to avoid being seen. I didn't want Linda looking out that window and catching me. When I reached the alley behind our house, I stopped. Thomas's old birdhouse project still sat on the patio table, half-painted. Emily's bike leaned against the fence, wet from the rain. The backyard looked almost peaceful, like nothing had changed. But everything had. I stepped onto the grass, heart racing, and made my way to the sliding glass door. I placed my hand on the handle, took a breath, pulled. It gave way with barely a sound. The house was quiet, too quiet, and I was inside. The moment I stepped inside, the air felt different. It smelled like potpourri, fake flowers, and lavender, the kind you find in motel bathrooms. It didn't smell like home anymore. I closed the sliding door behind me as quietly as I could. My footsteps on the kitchen tile felt too loud, even though I was wearing soft sneakers. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. Everything looked cleaner than usual, but not in a good way. Sterile, like someone had erased us. The framed photos from our hallway were gone. The small notepad we kept by the fridge was replaced by one with gold trim. Even the fruit bowl had been swapped for something ornamental and useless. I walked slowly, careful not to touch anything. My heart was pounding. Every creak of the floor made me flinch. I kept listening for footsteps, voices, anything. Thomas's office door was still shut. That almost made me cry. No one had touched it. Not yet. I turned the knob and slipped inside, closing the door gently behind me. The scent in the office was different. Familiar, like dust and old paper and wood polish. The chair was still pulled out a few inches from the desk, just like he always left it. His Sudoku puzzle was half finished on the table, pencil still resting on top. I moved quickly but carefully. I went straight to the filing cabinet. Middle drawer. There was a folder labeled Home in all caps. I pulled it out and flipped through the pages, my fingers shaking. There it was. The refinance paperwork from 2 years ago. And there was my name. Not just listed, but printed on the line for primary borrower. My eyes started to sting, but I blinked hard and kept reading. The mortgage, the insurance, the tax forms, all in my name. I had proof, real proof, and I hadn't even gotten to the best part yet. Tucked behind the stack of folders was something I didn't remember seeing before. A black folder with a single label, Post-Nup. The handwriting was Thomas's, I knew it instantly. I hesitated for a second. My hand was trembling as I opened it. Inside was a notarized postnuptial agreement, signed by both of us. I scanned it, barely breathing. It was dated a few months after the refinance. It stated clearly that in the event of Thomas's death, all jointly held property, including our house, would go to me. But what broke me wasn't the document. It was the note tucked behind it. Folded in half, written on yellow-lined paper, in Thomas's slightly messy handwriting. If you're reading this, I'm gone. And Mom has probably tried something. This is to protect you and Emily. Show it to a lawyer. Protect what's ours. I love you. Always. I sat down in his chair and pressed the note to my chest. My vision blurred, and for a long moment, I didn't move. I had come looking for proof. What I found was love. A quiet kind. A kind that plans ahead and doesn't announce itself. A kind that says, even after I'm gone, I've still got you. That note changed everything. I carefully placed the documents into my folder, folded the letter last, and tucked it inside, like something sacred. Then I stood up, took one last look around the room, and walked out the door without making a sound. I didn't feel scared anymore. I felt something else, solid, steady, like maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. Dana came over the next morning with a binder, a laptop, and a look that meant business. We sat at Mrs. Jenkins' kitchen table while Emily colored quietly in the next room. I laid out the refinance paperwork, the notarized postnup, and Thomas's letter, and Dana took it all in without saying much. She read everything twice. Then she looked up and said we had a strong case, but it wasn't going to be simple. Linda had already filed a petition to contest the postnup, claiming Thomas wasn't of sound mind when he signed it and accusing me of manipulating him during a vulnerable time. The words stung, even though I had expected something like this. Dana wasn't surprised. She said they'd try to paint me as greedy, dishonest, and emotionally unstable. It was a textbook move, and it made her furious. We spent the next few days gathering everything we could: medical records, financial statements, even emails between Thomas and me. I talked to his doctor, who remembered how Thomas had joked about the paperwork. I spoke to a few neighbors and coworkers. Everyone said the same thing. He was tired, yes, but lucid, and very clear about wanting to make sure Emily and I were protected. Walking into court that morning felt like stepping into a different world. The air was too cold. Everything smelled like paper and coffee and stress. Linda sat at the other table with her lawyer, a man who looked like he enjoyed making people uncomfortable. His name was Mark Silver. He didn't smile. The judge was quiet, older, with kind eyes, but no expression. I sat beside Dana and kept my hands folded tightly in my lap. Emily was at home with Mrs. Jenkins. I didn't want her anywhere near this. Mark went first. He painted Thomas as a man in decline, overwhelmed by a young wife and emotionally isolated from his family. He said the postnup was a product of manipulation. He used words like unstable and coerced. It was like watching someone describe a stranger. Then Dana stood and calmly laid out our case. She walked the judge through the timeline, the paperwork, the financial records. Then she called me to the stand. I was nervous at first. My voice shook on the first few answers. But the more I spoke, the steadier I felt. I talked about the refinance, how I used my savings when Thomas was struggling with his business. I explained why I hadn't made a big deal about it. He had a hard time accepting help, and I didn't want to hurt his pride. I never thought of it as some sacrifice. It was just what you do when you love someone. I told the truth. Every word. I didn't raise my voice or cry. I just told the court what happened in our home, what Thomas and I had agreed on, what we built together. I told them the house wasn't just property. It was where Emily took her first steps, where we painted the walls ourselves, where Thomas kept his birdhouse sketches and birthday cards in a drawer he never locked. By the time I stepped down, I wasn't afraid of Linda or her lawyer anymore. I wasn't angry either. I was clear. I had nothing to hide. I had done nothing wrong. Dana squeezed my hand under the table. Her eyes told me I had done exactly what I needed to do. No shouting, no spectacle, just the truth. And sometimes, that's enough. I thought the hardest part was over once I stepped down from the witness stand. My hands were still shaking in my lap when I heard a soft voice behind me. Emily had stood up. She had slipped into the courtroom quietly with Mrs. Jenkins during the recess, and now she was raising her hand like she was in school. Everyone turned. The judge looked surprised. Dana whispered to me not to worry, but I could feel her tense beside me. The judge asked her name and how old she was. Emily answered clearly, 10.5. He hesitated for a moment, then gave a small nod and told her she could speak if she wished. Emily stepped forward, her chin lifted higher than I'd seen in weeks. Her voice was soft, but it carried through the room. She said she wanted to talk about her dad. She said he loved our house. He loved the trees in the backyard and the way the morning light came through the kitchen window. He used to say it made him feel calm. Then she paused and took a breath. She looked over at Linda and then back at the judge. She said her dad always squeezed her mom's hand 3 times whenever he wanted to say I'm here. He did it when he was tired, when he was worried, and especially when he didn't want to talk but wanted her to know she wasn't alone. Emily said he did it the night before he died, right before bed. She said he looked at Mom for a long time and squeezed her hand 3 times and smiled. Then she told the court something that made the room go still. She said her dad once told her that Grandma didn't make him feel happy. She made him feel like he was always doing something wrong, that no matter what he did, it wasn't enough. He said being around her made him feel small, but being with Mom made him feel like he could breathe. No one moved. Even the court reporter had stopped typing. Emily stood there in her little black shoes, her shoulders pulled back like she had practiced it in her room. She said Mom saved our house when Dad got sick. She didn't tell anyone because she didn't want Dad to feel worse. She said that wasn't stealing, that was just being strong. I looked over and saw Linda staring straight ahead, her lips pressed so tight they had turned white. Dana reached over and placed a hand on my knee. The judge thanked Emily and asked if she wanted to sit back down. She nodded, walked quietly to the bench beside me, and took my hand. This time, I was the one who squeezed hers 3 times. The courtroom was silent, but something had shifted, something big, and I wasn't the only one who felt it. The judge returned to the bench after what felt like a lifetime. Her face was unreadable, but her voice was steady. She said the court found no reason to invalidate the postnuptial agreement and confirmed that I was the rightful owner of the property. She cited the refinance documents, the notarized postnup, and my contributions as proof. She also stated that the actions taken by Linda, including changing the locks and denying me entry, were unlawful. Then she issued a restraining order that barred Linda and Becky from coming near the house without my written consent. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but instead I just felt like I could finally take a full breath. Dana gripped my hand under the table and gave a small nod. Emily looked up at me from the gallery, her eyes wide with something between disbelief and joy. We walked out of that courtroom lighter, but not untouched. I was grateful. I was proud. But I also knew something had changed in me. That afternoon we met the locksmith at the house. He took his time, replaced every lock, and handed me a new set of keys. I held them in my palm for a long time before pocketing them. The floral curtains were the first to go. I tore them down while Emily opened windows. The stale scent of someone else's choices drifted out with the breeze. We moved slowly, putting things back in place. Thomas's photos. The throw blanket Emily always used. A candle he used to light after dinner. It was like stitching a broken seam. Not perfect, but strong enough to hold. 3 nights later, I found an envelope slid under the front door. No name, no stamp, just 6 typed words on a plain sheet of paper. This house will always be mine. I read it twice. I knew who it was from. I didn't feel fear. Not anger either. I felt something deeper. Something she couldn't reach. This house was never hers. Not really. Not in the way that mattered. I stood in the quiet kitchen, holding that note in my hand, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like something was slipping away. I felt like something had just begun. I found the journal a few days after the ruling, tucked inside a box labeled Misk and Thomas's handwriting. It was buried beneath old receipts, business cards, and scraps of wood design sketches. I almost missed it. The cover was worn leather, the edges curled from time and use. When I opened it, I realized it wasn't just any notebook. It was his garden journal. Page after page of soil notes, plant lists, seasonal diagrams. His handwriting ran along the margins with comments like needs more sun and don't trust that seed packet. There were dates going back years. Toward the end, the entries changed. There was a full sketch labeled Emily's Garden. It had little animal-shaped flower beds, a butterfly corner, and a small pond made from an old galvanized tub. Next to each plant, Thomas had written little notes. Marigolds for protection, rosemary for remembrance, lavender for peace, strawberries for sweetness. It read more like a letter than a plan. I sat with that journal for a long time, tracing his pen marks with my finger. It felt like he was right there, whispering a project into my ear one last time. I didn't know how to garden. I barely kept a cactus alive. But I knew one thing: we were going to build that garden. Emily's eyes lit up when I showed her the sketches. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at the page like it was the blueprint to a secret world. Then she nodded, serious and quiet, and asked if she could paint the signs for each flower bed. We started the next weekend. I cleared space along the back fence while Emily painted wooden markers shaped like rabbits and butterflies. We dug small squares and turned the soil with borrowed tools. Mrs. Jenkins brought over a wheelbarrow and a flat of herbs from her own backyard. Other neighbors dropped off seedlings, watering cans, compost. It didn't take long for the yard to change. The bare patches turned into rows of green. The herb beds smelled like lemon and earth. The marigolds stood in the center, tall and golden, their petals catching the afternoon sun like tiny lanterns. One afternoon, as we were planting the last row of marigolds, Emily stood up and brushed her hands off on her jeans. She looked at me and asked if we could bury the letter there. I didn't have to ask which one she meant. I went inside and got it from the drawer where I had put it, not quite ready to throw it away but not wanting to hold on to it either. We wrapped the paper in a napkin, folded it in half, and placed it into the dirt. Emily whispered, "Let's turn it into something beautiful." We covered it together and planted 3 marigold seedlings right on top. That moment felt like more than a ritual. It felt like a decision. We weren't going to carry the bitterness. We were going to plant over it, and let it change into something else. As the garden grew, people started to stop by just to see it. Neighbors walked their dogs slower. Some asked for cuttings. A few brought more seeds. Even Mrs. Jenkins made it a habit to bring over lemonade and sit with us while we pulled weeds and added new flowers. By midsummer, the butterfly patch was bursting with color. The pond glittered in the afternoon sun. Emily's strawberry bed overflowed with red berries so sweet they barely made it into the house. And in the middle, the marigolds stood tall and proud, undisturbed by what had been buried beneath them. Thomas had left us more than a house. He had left us this space, this idea. That healing didn't always mean fixing something. Sometimes it meant creating something new in the space left behind. And together, we did. Seed by seed, root by root, one day at a time. I stood at the edge of the garden, the sun low behind me, casting everything in gold. Emily was crouched by the lavender bed, gently pouring water over the roots. Her hair caught the light, and for a moment, it felt like nothing had ever been broken. That afternoon I had opened the mailbox and found a certified letter from Linda's lawyer. She had moved to Florida. In the letter, she formally relinquished any further claims to Thomas's estate, stating that she wished to avoid future conflict in the interest of family peace. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't even feel relief. What I felt was stillness, like something inside me had finally gone quiet, not because someone gave up, but because I no longer needed to fight. This house had become more than a place. It had become a boundary, a symbol, proof that I could hold my ground without turning into someone I wasn't, that I could protect what mattered without raising my voice. That staying could be an act of strength too. I used to think strength looked like shouting in a courtroom or slamming a door. Now I know better. Strength looks like planting marigolds over a threat. It looks like letting a child speak truth in a room full of adults. It looks like not shrinking when someone tries to erase you. I reclaimed this home, not just with legal documents or locks and keys, but with choices, with patience, with love that didn't flinch when it was tested. I reclaimed my voice too. Not the loud kind, but the kind that doesn't shake when saying no. The kind that says, I belong here. I matter. My story matters. Thomas gave me the tools, but I built this part on my own. And Emily, she gave me every reason to keep going, even on days when I wanted to disappear. This garden is what remains, not just of him, but of us. Of what we protected. Of what we chose to grow. Resilience doesn't always roar. Sometimes it breathes. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it blooms quietly behind a house that once felt lost. And love, the kind that holds through storms and silence, it never really leaves. It becomes part of the soil, part of who we are, and we carry it forward, every single day. If you had been in my shoes, what would you have done? Would you have walked away? Or would you have stayed and fought for your home, for your child, for your truth? I think about that a lot. Not just what I did, but why I did it. There were so many chances to give up, to let it go, to take the easier road. But something inside me kept saying, this matters. not because of the bricks or the mortgage, but because of what it meant to be seen, to be heard, to be respected. If you've ever faced something like this, a moment where everything you built was put at risk, I hope you know you're not alone. Whether it was your family, your job, or your sense of self, you deserve to protect what matters. You deserve to stay, even when someone tries to push you out. I'd love to hear your story. If this reminded you of a time you had to stand your ground or start over, share it in the comments. Your voice might help someone else find theirs. And if this story moved you, even a little, please like the video. Subscribe if you haven't already. We tell stories like this because they're real. Because life is messy and beautiful and sometimes unfair. But there's always a way through. Thank you for listening, for sitting with me in the hard parts and the hopeful ones. I hope you leave here a little lighter, a little braver, and a little more certain that your story matters too.